We're expecting about 50.
Okay, all right. And Cleophas,
Yes.
the the, the visioning discussion today, it's likely to go for about an hour and something.
Yeah, now an hour and a half like last time.
Yeah, that's fine. Going through the slide, let me just go through it just to show you what we'll be discussing about what is broken. We're starting off from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And we'll be discussing about how to really begin to even imagine the role of technology at the very beginning, and then how to will end up with how to craft new vision, what things to consider, and then we'll go into what is likely to be the next session as a progression, which will be how to do business overview or analysis, and then how to begin to do a process mapping, which are usually important things for the new information managers and records managers to know before they can define what technology is suitable for the organizations.
Okay.
Yeah, and then from there we'll go into questions and discussions.
So, so this next session we looking at 7th of August.
Yes.
Yeah. So 7th of August. So I guess towards the end you just brief that what is it that we'll cover that time, so that people can look forward to it.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll build it up that way. So we'll build it up in a progression.
Yeah. That's super.
Okay. Let's go back. Otherwise, any things that have happened so far? People back to work?
Yes, slowly. People are more or less trying to trickle in. Of course, slowly with the precautions. The government hasn't quite fully allowed certain industries like doesn't allow fully gathering. The hospitality still has some restrictions. Yeah.
Okay.
But you know, by and large, many other than the educational institutions, many of us we weren't quite stopped from working.
Yes.
The organizations themselves which are managing.
Yes.
Putting in certain protocols. So again, yeah. But the bulk, even the public sector, like the ministries, other than the elderly, the senior guys, 58 plus, who are supposed to work from home here. Many of us are effectively working either from home or at work, something like that.
Okay. But how is the pandemic situation? Is it getting under control then?
The cases are increasing.
Oh.
Yeah, I think now we're headed to almost I guess by today we would have hit it's almost around 7,000, because yesterday it was 6,900, the case loads.
Okay.
Yeah. And so of course that, of course worries, eh?
That worries is true, yeah.
It's worrying. So we don't know what decision will be made on Monday, whether they're going to allow access into Nairobi or it will remain restricted. Nairobi and Mombasa.
I see. People are expecting that it will be opened up.
Yes, I know people are expectant for that opening. I think the thing will be the preparedness of, especially at the county level, to handle a surge in numbers. because you can imagine if you open Nairobi, a number of people and many of them will flock to the rurals.
Yes, that's true. And this is a season, isn't it? Huh?
Yeah, and that is a significant danger. You know, assuming schools won't open in September, they go up to January. So people may as well, especially those who don't have these virtual things, they must well decide to go to the village. It may be a bit cheaper to survive there than in Nairobi.
Indeed.
And you see now that is what can be, because the bulk of our elderly people are in the rurals and who are the most vulnerable. Yeah, and
so there are likely to be some precautions in the travel restrictions, actually, isn't it?
Yeah, hopefully they should be, and yeah, hopefully they will give some precautions. Otherwise, we would expect at the ground level the health system to be a bit strong, because the government says the risk is most of the people are asymptomatic.
Oh, I see. Okay.
So they will well go to the village thinking they're okay.
That's true. That's true. That's very true. Wow. Okay.
So we're waiting to see how the government will handle the situation.
Let's hope for the best, actually.
Yeah.
Let me check about Robert.
Welcome, Billy and the rest. Billy.
Yeah,
Billy
thank
Majero,
you.
welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you.
can
Morning. Yeah.
Morning, I can see Amare. Amare, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah, so Robert will be joining us, and we'll just start at the time when you're ready, clear for us.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Hi guys, it's Robert here.
Robert.
Hi, Robert. We'll put you on Collins. You can put him on video then.
Hi.
That's Billy.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Billy.
Use reposition my.
Hey, morning, guys.
Morning, Boniface. So Collins, you'll put Robert on video?
He is, I can see him.
Oh, he is, okay.
Hi there.
Hi, Robert.
Hey, how are you?
Very well, very well.
So, Robert, we are the only two guys on video.
Okay. And so is everybody else joining at 8:30? Is that correct, or?
No, they're actually joining now.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
So I had for some reason I thought it started at 8:30. I thought.
Yeah, and you're 1 hour. Okay, you are the same time as Kenya time, actually.
Yeah, I'm actually. Yeah, actually we're the same time as Kenya. So.
Okay, great. Good.
So it's very early for you. It's 7 o'clock in the morning there
It is, yeah,
Netherlands.
it's usual time. Yeah, it is early, but we're always early here.
No.
Yeah.
So probably we'll take some, just 5 minutes, we see if we can get a few more people, then we'll start.
You are in Kenya. Are you, Cleophas?
Yes, I'm in Kenya, I'm in Nairobi.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I've never been there, but I've heard many good things about the place.
Yeah, we will now with this collaboration, we can look forward to hosting you post-COVID very soon.
And how is it in Kenya with the COVID?
Same challenges. Our numbers, our caseloads are increasing now. And of course, restrictions around economic activities. Yeah, it's more or less the same situation we see across.
I live in Greece, and the Greeks have handled it surprisingly well. Actually, we've only had I think 160 fatalities. I mean, which is still a lot, you know, but still compared to other countries, it's very low. They imposed a very strict lockdown from the very beginning, which was kind of controversial at the time, but it seems to have paid off. But the tourist season is starting now, so everybody's worried that people might bring it back in. But anyway, so far, so good.
Yeah. Okay.
And how has the economy fared on?
I beg your pardon?
How has the economy fared on?
Well, the economy was very bad anyway, you know. So it hasn't been good for people, I mean, but they were already struggling a lot anyway. So and in fact, the government gave people 400 euros a month. People got 400 euros a month from the government if they weren't able to work. But for many people, that was more than the salary they had anyway, you know. So some people welcomed it.
See, okay.
Because they were earning, say, 350 a month normally, and then they were getting 400. So it wasn't too bad. But I'm not sure in the long run. Now the government's got to sort of figure out how to. You know, they spent all this money that they didn't really have actually. So, but anyway, I'm quite happy about the way it's developed so far. The Netherlands has been. The Netherlands had quite a controversial approach to it, didn't they?
Yeah, they're always a bit controversial in the approach to things.
Yeah. But it's very they have this. I mean, every country now has a kind of expert, or I don't know what the word I'm looking for, but they have in Greece. There's this doctor who is the kind of spokesperson for the COVID, and every day at 6 o'clock he talks about it. And at the beginning, when people asked why it was so important to have this strict lockdown, he said that we needed to protect the old people, you know, our grandparents and parents, because they are our identity, and without them we wouldn't exist. Without them we would be nothing. And he broke down in tears.
Oh,
But
really?
it's very important in Greece, this, you know, the family, the protecting the parents, protecting the grandparents is very important in their culture. So that's why people were quite acceptance of this strict lockdown.
Oh, that is
Also
an interesting reasoning behind.
Yeah. Also in that culture in Greece, people say, you greet people, you say hello and you say goodbye by saying yasas, which means your health. So it's also culturally they have this desire to protect their health. So that's another reason people took it very seriously here.
Okay, good.
Collins, are we expecting more people?
More people, but I would want us to just start. We are meeting people as we go.
Okay. Yeah, so that we are within the time.
Yeah.
Fine. So good morning, all. Welcome again. Vili, are you there? I know
Yeah, I'm here.
maybe as always, you'll start us with a short prayer.
Okay. Let's pray. Father, in the name of Jesus, we come before you this morning with thanksgiving in our heart. We thank you for this opportunity once again to have our second session on Zoom. We pray that, Lord, you shall help us internalize and even operationalize what we learned today. Bless our trainers, bless everyone who is joining in, and be with us from now till the end of the training session. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Thank you. So, colleagues, we meet again after our first webinar on the 5th of June. We here again to continue the conversation. As we did, remember out of that discussion on 1st of June, some of the things that came out were for us to get technology right in records and information management, we need to paint a clear vision of what technology needs to do for us. We need to improve on interaction with the stakeholders. We need to build strategic alignment. We need to get the right tools. We need to know that the users of records are kings and queens. We need to reskill and retool so that we're able to operate at a higher level. And so we thought we'll just continue this because the end game of all this is how do we ensure that we effectively integrate technology in the management of records and information. And so today we are building on the point on building a compelling vision for technology, because that's where it's going to start before we even start thinking about tools. And I know I keep getting questions from professional colleagues between DCDMS and DDRMS and this one, which one should I take, which one should I not take? But I think that's a bit of climbing the tree from the top. I think it's good to start by understanding where are we going before we then figure out what is it that we need to go where we are going. Because as they say, if you don't know where you're going, it doesn't matter where you end up. And so today we're glad Dr. Jones is back here, and he will of course be in these sessions for some time to come. And he's also graciously come with Robert Stowell from, I hope I'll get this right, from the European Center for Development of Vocational Training. Is it?
That's correct.
Which is a European Union agency in Greece. So, Doc, without much ado, thank you so much for really agreeing to work with us through this journey. This is an area as a profession, and especially in this part in Kenya, it's an area of a lot of interest. As you may know, our government and our institutions are heavy on digital, going heavy on digital. Today, unlike before in Kenya, you probably know mobile money transactions is really the thing. We even now pay court fines using mobile transaction, you can imagine. So, you know, virtually all payments are now happening that way. And so what then, that things like driving licenses, business permits, we are getting them digitally. Now that then means we, as the people who are handling these records, information and data, we have to get our footprint right. and really play our role. And so then we also demonstrate our relevance to organization. And I'm just giving this background for Robert's also info. So for us as records and information people under the umbrella of the Kenya Association of Records Managers and Archivists, we are very deliberate to ensure that we get our bearings right. For a long time, we know in our profession, records people tended to speak to ourselves. You know, how do you do classification? How do you do storage? How do you do access? Those things. But our customers, who are the organizations we work for, don't care about those things. They care about what they get. They care about how we make their lives easier. And so we really deliberate. In fact, what we call applied records information management. It's really an area we're paying a lot of attention so that we are aligned and responsive towards our organization, our society, our country needs. And that's what that's why, Robert, we're having this kind of discussions. How do we ensure we are relevant and we are adding value and always in tandem with the direction the world is moving? And so we are so glad you'll get time, Robert, to join us and share just your thoughts and just help us grow. And of course, we look forward to having even more and more collaborations and continuous engagements around this. So thank you so much. On behalf of the colleagues, I think I'll pass it to you. Jones, you give us a pattern on how we progress, and then you can carry it on from there. To the rest of the colleagues, please, if you have any question, use the chat feature. I think that is not restricted. I know we have centrally muted all videos and all mics, but you may use the chat feature. The discussion will go on to post in a question. Thank you, or a comment. Thank you. Welcome, Jones.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very happy to be here this morning again. And for those that haven't met me or known me, my name's Jones Lukose. I'm the Information Management Officer at the International Criminal Court. But today I do come in peace. So don't worry and don't be scared about anything. This morning, we also joined with Robert Stowell, and you'll hear a little bit from him about his story, the chaos and also the challenges of records management, information management in the area that he works in the EU. And then we proceed on also with a discussion right on the topic of visioning technology for RIM, records and information management. Of course, we know that it's very, very important that we understand where we are going or where our organizations are going before we even begin to craft the technological solutions that will be applied for record and information management. This is why this session, as Cleophas mentioned, is designed to take us back to the very beginning of how do we even start. What are some of the things that we need to consider? How do we look at our past experience and learn from the experience and pick up from there? So people from where we are now, I think Robert and myself will be very keen to share some of the pitfalls that we have encountered, and also to at least help you to see that you don't necessarily have to copy exactly what the institutions in Europe, USA, and so on have undertaken. We have an opportunity to jump. Cleophas also mentioned very well that Kenya is very ahead, is really, really ahead when it comes to mobile technology, which means that in terms of technology, there are certain dimensions and domains where Kenya has jumped ahead already. So because we are already, as Kenyans, we are already on the mobile platform, we're already on the mobile infrastructure and the mobile technology, it will be counterproductive for us to begin to adopt technologies that existed before the mobile era. So those are some of the things that we'll need to be bearing in mind as we look forwards to visioning technology for RIM. So starting off, we'll just start off perhaps with hearing a little bit about Robert and his experience from his organization side of it, and then we'll carry on with the discussion. The discussion is going to go on for about maybe 35 minutes. And then from there, we can go into a question and answer. And hopefully, we'll paint a picture of what it is that you need to consider and bear in mind as you're looking towards adopting or creating or crafting solutions, technological solutions for records and information management. And then we'll end also with giving you a small snapshot of what the next session in August is going to be about. So this is a progression. So we hope that it's a journey that we'll take on as we're having these knowledge cafes, so that you can be able to not just get inspired, but also learn something about something that will help you in your journey, not just in the organization, but also in your profession as such. So without much ado, I will perhaps just allow Robert to come in and share a little bit about himself and give us some idea about your journey, Robert, from the time that you started off this domain of records and information management up to where you are now.
Okay.
Robert, go ahead.
Hi. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me to come along and be part of this group today. I'm a member of various different networks and groups dealing with records management, mainly in the EU system. But this one definitely has the most interesting name. I think Karma is a very relevant name for a records management group. We have this notion of karma, that we will reap what we sow, that we will the consequences of what we do now will be felt later on down the line, and that's of course very tied in with the notion of our objectives as records managers. The things we do today will take fruit or not, maybe 10 years or so from now. So I think it's a very good name for the group. Now, something about myself. I'm British. I'm from the Isle of Man. I've worked in a few different international organizations. And by that, I mean intergovernmental international organizations in The Hague. I also worked with Jones in the past at the International Criminal Court. And since 2013, I've worked at the European Centre for the Development of Vocational Training, which is an agency of the European Commission here in Thessaloniki in Greece. And I am a records manager and archivist. That's my main job. But I'm also the data protection officer. Now this is, in Europe, this is a very big thing. We have the GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, which came into force in 2016. And it's actually data protection and records management are very closely entwined, actually, especially with regard to retention periods, or what we call storage limitation in the data protection world. But also in terms of the data that we collect, the type of information that we collect, whether it's structured data or unstructured data, how it's processed, who can access it, and so on. So the two roles complement each other, and it's becoming more and more common, actually, that records managers and data protection officers combine, and often many of the EU agencies now are starting to have a single person doing both. It's becoming more common. So I'm actually leaving the EU system quite soon. I have another job in an international financial institution where I will be working in IT. This is also another interesting subject, is where the records manager is positioned within the organization. When I look at the different organizations that I interact with, sometimes the records manager is in IT, Sometimes it's in legal or compliance. Sometimes it's in general services, you know, the general support function of the organization. Sometimes it's somewhere else entirely, like in the communication department. At the moment where I am, it's in the more of a compliance function, actually. I report to the director. So when I go to the bank, it will be within IT. And this brings us on to what Cleophas was saying, that we have this big discussion about tech and whether we should use SharePoint, whether we should use Documentum, which type of EDMS we should use. But as Cleophas said, it's more important really to go back to the beginning and look at what we want to achieve, because these tools are just that they are tools that help us to achieve an objective that we have, and they shouldn't take over and dictate what we are doing. Now, if I look back at my own agency, the agency has quite an interesting history. It was the first EU agency. It opened in 1975 in West Berlin as a political gesture at that time. It moved to Thessaloniki in 1995, and for many years they didn't have any kind of records management or archiving system in place. Now this all changed a few years ago when we put a records management policy and a records classification and retention schedule in place. This gave everything a completely different focus. The records management policy made it clear what we wanted to do. And the records management policy doesn't refer to any EDMS. It talks purely about having a system in place, which nowadays obviously is likely to involve an EDMS, but primarily we should have a system in place where responsibilities are defined, where we know what a record is, where we know what we want to achieve in the long run. So the introduction of a policy document signed at the highest level of the organization, I think, is absolutely key. And for any of you looking at how to move ahead with RIM in your organization, I'd say that's absolutely essential. The records management classification plan and retention schedule. Now, some people use the term file plan. Some people use the term classification plan. We use the term classification plan, talking about business classifications. This basically is a kind of conceptual representation of all the functions and activities of the organization. And it's built on what we call a FAT structure, which I guess most of you will have heard of, where we have functions, activities, and transactions. And every type of record that is generated in the organization or received into the organization, it's possible to find a home for it somewhere within this classification plan. And each of these classifications, the document defines what we have to do with these things eventually, their disposition, which is either to destroy it after a certain period of time or to not destroy it, obviously, which involves its permanent preservation. So it's quite simple actually, with basically of all these classifications, 2/3 of them, the final disposition is destroy, and 1/3 of them, it is to preserve in some form. Now, of those classifications with a disposition to preserve, 1/3 of them is simple preserve, and 2/3 of them is to make a selection or a sampling. And a selection, this is really for historical archiving. A selection would be a conscious decision to keep things of a certain type, whereas a sampling is just a representation to show how things were done, basically. But actually, most things get destroyed, especially now with the GDPR and the need to observe storage limitations. Most of our classifications end in destruction. And actually, sometimes I feel the main focus of my work is destroying things. So it's you could even call it your retention policy. You could even call it a destruction policy in a way.
So you've evolved from the record keeper, chief record keeper, to chief record destroyer, isn't it?
I know, you know, they it's like after the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima, Oppenheimer, the scientist who'd worked on the Manhattan Project, said, quoted from the Bhagavad Gita, he said, "Now I am the destroyer of worlds." I mean, that's sometimes what I feel like when I'm destroying everything. But it's very, it's actually very important. You shouldn't underestimate the importance of retention periods and making sure you destroy things, because if you don't destroy things that you don't need, it's a waste of resources. You're keeping things unnecessarily. You're wasting money and time and effort on storing things that you don't need to have. And when I say storage, I'm talking about both physical and electronic records. With physical records, the need to erase is more tangible because you're very clearly saving space, valuable physical space. With electronic records, people often turn a blind eye to this because storage costs are so cheap these days. But actually, it's equally important to erase the electronic records that you no longer need. If you keep them in an electronic document management system, you're simply congesting people's search results. And the users don't like that. When they search for something and they get 1 million hits, it's frustrating. You know, we like it in Google. We kind of like that we get millions of hits, and the most useful ones are at the top. But even the best document management system isn't as good as Google. You know, so it's better to minimize the congestion in your system. So anyway, so our classification plan is very much focused on making sure we destroy things on time. And with erasure, with our retention periods, we have maximum retention periods and minimum retention periods. There's also an important distinction to make there. Now, a minimum retention period, for example, with most financial documents, you'll have a particular period within which time auditors would expect to see things. Yeah, so the auditors expect that within 7 years, if they request a certain type of document, you should be able to present it. If during that 7-year period you can't present it, or the organization can't present it, it creates problems. At best, it looks incompetent or sloppy. At worst, it looks suspicious, as if things have been destroyed for some malicious reason. So if things need to be kept for, say, 7 years, you need to make sure that it happens. You need to avoid that people destroy things too early, because that's also a risk. You know, we have the risk of keeping things too long, but also the risk, which is more serious but less common, that things are destroyed too early when they still need to be accessed. So and then on the other hand, we have sort of maximum retention periods, and this is things that need to be destroyed after a certain period of time. Not that they can be destroyed, but they have to be. And this is mainly information that involves personal data. For example, the CVs of unselected candidates. If you've told people you will destroy them after 2 years, then you need to do that. And the GDPR puts lots of pressure on us now to observe these maximum retention periods. So anyway, we have this records management policy, this classification plan and retention schedule, which allows us to categorize any type of information that we have and tells us what to do with it, how long we need to keep it, what to do with it after it's at the end of its life cycle. And having this document really removes ambiguity. It makes it clear for people what needs to be done. Now we use, going on to the EDMS, we use Open Text Content Server. And this has records management functionality. So these classifications are reflected in the EDMS. So documents might be saved into a particular folder. That folder has a classification applied to it. And the records management functionality of the system allows us to run what we call disposition reports, which identify things that are scheduled to be destroyed. So this is when we talk about the records management capability of an EDMS or EDRMS, I find it's very important that the system should be able to do this work for us. The system should be able to calculate when things are scheduled for erasure or when they're scheduled to be treated for long-term preservation and so on. Now this rapid acceleration of digitization that we've seen recently, and I believe you're also seeing this in Kenya. I mean, you've already moved ahead a lot. I know this with, I had colleagues from the UK who have been to work in Nairobi in the UN organizations. They were always very impressed by how you've embraced this mobile payment technology. So this is something we don't even have, for example, in Greece yet, or Northern Europe. This rapid acceleration of digitization, digital transformation, also has a bearing on these things I've been talking about, how we handle electronic records. For one, it might move us away from a document-centric records management. So we talk about structured data and unstructured data, with structured data being information in databases, transactions in databases, and unstructured data being documents, PDFs, Word documents, and so on. And we see now also in my own work with this COVID situation, people having to work at home, we're using less and less, we are creating less and less documents. So our business processes are evolving, and things that in the past involved somebody filling in a form, even electronically a form, which existed, say, as a PDF or Word document. Now we're moving into handling these things as structured data. So as workflows with transactions, and the records actually exist as updates in a database. This creates also a big challenge for records managers, and we have to be more engaged with our ERPs. An ERP, an enterprise resource planning system, for example, SAP, the system the organization has in place to handle its financial transactions and resource planning and so on. We also have to be, as records managers, aware of what's going on there, because there are also records in these systems. Records are not only in our EDMS. So anyway, maybe am I talking too long now?
No, Robert, you're doing fine. Yeah, you can carry on. You have got maybe 5 more minutes.
Oh yeah. So these are all. So these issues where we now you have structured data, unstructured data, digital records. This brings us on to another important topic, which is maybe at the heart of records management, which is authenticity. So far, I've been talking about keeping things for as long as they need to be kept, or destroying them eventually. But it's all very well keeping things, but then if you present it to the auditors or whichever other body is checking up on you, and they don't find it reliable, they question its authenticity, then it's all been in vain. So our systems need to give us sufficient guarantees that things are what they purport to be. And the EDMS can obviously, an EDMS has features that help us along that way. Audit events, which can show or prove that no kind of retroactive modification had happened to a document, or access controls that limit who can do what to items. Now, the kind of final step in this whole process is long-term digital preservation, i.e. Permanent preservation. Now, permanent is quite a long time. You might be talking forever, and this would this is mainly kind of legal documents or documents that have historical value. Now, the document management systems that people are using these days, organizations are using these days, unfortunately, most of them don't really come also with features for long-term digital preservation. So, for example, we use OpenText Content Server, but for long-term digital preservation, we send material to the historical archives of the European Union. And they have a system for long-term digital preservation, which is Archivematica. Another one is Preservica. And these systems are equipped for the really long-term preservation. And I mean, if you bring this up to your management, the idea that you might need another system for long-term preservation, they will probably go crazy, because if you've spent years convincing them that you need an EDMS for your records, and then suddenly you come along and say, actually, we need another system for a certain type of records, then the first thing they think is, why doesn't one system do both of these things? Which of course is a very good question, and I think in the future these document management, these big EDMSs will evolve and take on that functionality as well, because for small organizations it's too much also to have a preservation system. But something about these preservation systems, they are based around the what's called the OAIS model, which it's a model for open archival information systems. I don't remember the standard number off the top of my head, but you can look that up. And basically this is a standard which emerged from the space industry. The space industry actually is kind of traditionally led the way in long-term digital preservation, because they have very specific requirements with regard to that. They might send a satellite into space in the 80s, and then it reaches its destination not satellite, a kind of a rover into space in the 80s, and 20 years later it reaches its destination, and they need to communicate with it, but it's still using software that was created 20 years earlier. So to overcome these kind of challenges, the space industry came up with this OAIS model for long-term digital preservation, which is kind of at the heart of the approach that regular organizations make now with regard to digital preservation. But of course, we don't need something so complicated, and it's kind of complicated. If you look at the OAIS model, it's quite overwhelming, its technical complexity. But essentially, these systems, if they use the word ingest, so if you save something into such a system, it preserves always the version that was imported into the system. It also creates a kind of consultation copy. It might create another copy with redactions if that's possible, and then it performs various technical checks to make sure there's no corruption of data over time. It uses checksums and so on. But this is really looking very far ahead, and it might be that you have very few things that need long-term preservation. Like I said earlier, most things get destroyed eventually, and long-term preservation, often it means, usually now we mean permanent, but if it just means 20 years or so, then normally the systems that regular systems should be able to handle that kind of backward compatibility of file types and so on. So let me see where I was going now. Maybe one final thing I will say on this, which I think is very important, is the language that we use. The language that we use to talk about records management and information when we are communicating with each other, communicating within our organization. It can be very confusing, and this is something that we underestimate. There are words that we use in records and information management that have multiple meanings and different meanings for different people, even within the same area of work. Look, for example, at the word file. For somebody dealing with physical records, a file is a binder, a collection of A4 documents grouped together somehow. With digital information, when you say a file, people think you mean an individual document. So this is like a massive difference even within one field of within one subject. You also have the word classification. I mean, for me as a records manager, classification means business classification. But for people dealing with information security, classification means a security level, classified information. This can avoid confusion, if you start saying things need to be classified. Some people might think you're talking about information security and locking down access, when you might just be talking about categorizing. So this is important, and this is something that the records management policy helps with, in that it provides definitions and a common language to ensure that people are on the same page with the things that they are talking about. So asking the question, where are we going? You need to write it down, figure out where you're going, write it down in a policy, and don't stress out about the policy. I mean, it can be kind of scary to write a policy. You look online, you see examples from other organizations, and they look very legalistic. And it can lead to this kind of paralysis where you're not sure where to begin, or you're not sure whether it will be good enough. But it doesn't matter if it's not perfect. It's not a document. It's not like you're writing the constitution of a country or something. I mean, it's a records management policy that you can revise whenever you want. You could revise it every 6 months if you wanted to. I mean, ideally not, but you could you can just get something out there, and over time you can update it. And the same with the classification plan and retention schedule. With regard to the classifications, the different, i.e. listing the different types of information that your organization handles. The first time round, you're probably going to miss some things, you know, you'll overlook some things. And then over time, you will realize this. Somebody has a document that needs to be classified. They look in the classification plan and there's no home for it. I mean, it's not the end of the world. You can just make a note of this and put it into a future revision. So I very much believe it's good to allow this process to be organic. Just get some documentation out there, have it approved by the management, and review it periodically. Let it grow and evolve. Don't allow this desire for perfection to paralyze you. I mean, this is obviously, this is something you can apply to your life as well. You know, sometimes we get paralyzed. We don't move ahead because we're obsessed with perfection. But we can't really aspire to perfection in the short term, at least. But in the long term, we can aim to get somewhere in that general direction. So, with your policy, other key documentation, get something done and allow it to grow over time, and don't be scared to put something out there because you're worried that it won't be good enough. You know, just take some action. Okay, so I think that's. Yes. I think I've said enough now. Maybe I'll add something again later, but maybe I'll hand back to Jones now.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, Robert, for reminding us, taking us back to the very beginning and reminding some of us about some of the things that we have forgotten about the practices of records management and where the priorities are. But we ask ourselves, actually, after having done all this, gone through all the preparation and so on, what is not working? You know, why is it that we have so much conflict, actually, in this domain, in this space? Records managers conflicting with IT managers, information managers stuck in the middle between the business and the technology providers. The fights we have on a daily basis with vendors who are providing technology, even beginning just to understand the internal fight we have between ourselves and the data and the records that we manage. This is a very interesting, I think, dilemma that we find ourselves in. Everywhere we look, we find something that is not working. We go and buy a system, could be an EDMS system, an ERP, or some database solution, or some cloud service. We always find something major. Actually, it's not something small. We always find something major that is not working. Where is it? Well, how can we position our thinking and our mindset in such a space, such a domain where there are so many things that don't work? Now, just looking back to the fundamentals, for me, for example, when I first joined the International Criminal Court in 2005, we only had about 50 servers. And within a span of 10 years, we have at least one server per staff. Can you imagine? One server per staff. So if you have, say, 1,500 staff, for example, all over the world, we have 1,500 servers, and they're increasing. And this is just what we are able to count. If we add on the virtual servers and so on, I'm sure we'll have at least 10 servers per individual staff. Now, this is confusing. Where is everything going? When I first joined, actually, the court, the Arusha court, that was in 2002, 2003, I could hold all the data of the court actually in one device. Believe it or not, I could hold 2003, all the data that the organization, all the judicial information, the records and everything digitized, I could hold them in one device. And at that time, we were so excited. We were so excited that, hey, we've got a handle on everything, you know. Here, our data is here. And we could show people when they come, you see, your data is seated here. When the judges visit, we say, yeah, this is where your records are. The money that the organization has paid to digitize and so on, we can show this is what we have done. Now, guess what? 5 years, just 5 years from there, we couldn't tell anything. What we noticed was that in my own experience, I've seen information really that I am processing or handling doubling twice a day. Can you imagine? Twice a day is a lot. It's a lot. Twice a day, doubling. Can you imagine? This is just unbelievable. I used to be able to process all my emails within 5 minutes, either at the beginning of the day or at the end of the day. These days, I can't get a handle of it. I can't. There's some emails I don't even look at. So ask myself now, how do I know whether there are important records in there to be kept? How do I know if those emails reflect transactions that need to be processed in a manner that perhaps, as Robert has said, apply retention policies on it? So it's very interesting dilemmas. So we find that also our information is now consumed by more people at a very fast rate. For example, the ICC right now, there was a time that we had a session for one of the arrested, accused persons from Sudan, just recently. And we thought that, of course, this is a big deal, but we didn't expect that to create a huge amount of demand for consumption from the public. So what happened was we saw, okay, this is somebody nobody else has ever heard of. Perhaps we thought, no one knows this fella. Perhaps just the Sudanese and maybe the few people that follow, the legal people that follow the work of the court and so on might be interested, maybe some journalists, maybe a couple of few countries and so on. But what we noticed is that in the middle of the session, the systems began to freeze. The streams that we could send out of the court sessions, from the court sessions live, began to freeze and to buffer. And that confounded us. It confounded us because we thought, hey, I thought we had the best streamlined information systems that we could manage. I thought that perhaps maybe something technically had gone wrong along the pipeline. But little did we know that actually there was a massive demand for consumption of the streams from developing countries. We had completely underestimated. And of course, you know what happens when there is demand from developing countries. There are people who are trying to connect with low bandwidth and high latency devices where internet is not as throttled as in some of the European regions. So you're talking about people, say, connecting from, say, a village using the available bandwidth at that time. So our systems here, even though they are really designed to provide access at a very rapid level, they were not designed, adapted to detect massive amounts of people trying to connect using low latency networks. So that's the reason why we started having this problem. We thought maybe perhaps we have been hacked. But it was not a matter of hacking. It was just that all of a sudden there was such a high demand. So again, just to stress the point that the envisioning of technology, even though it helps us to save time and to create also to scale what we are doing as information managers, to provide information much faster and quicker to the public, inherently there are some things we have to keep track of. Is it the work of information managers, records managers to have to think about these things? Or should we just be focused on the areas that we have really traditional expertise, that is classifying, keeping things and looking at specific domains of records management? Should we be broad enough? Should we envision technology that works across the whole platform or the whole domain, the whole space that our businesses are involved in? That's a fantastic question to ask. We should continue asking ourselves more and more. And then, of course, you know that we are coming through a period where there's ever increasing regulation, and also at the same time, there's a lot of risk. Traditionally, we used to think about classification in a way that we configured our systems to help us to classify information based on how we assess the risk, for example. But these days it's very interesting. You have a piece of information, for example, we may have a piece of information that is out there in the public domain. The fact that it's out there in the public domain is fine. We assume that this is public, but as soon as we touch it, it becomes a hot potato. And we from Kenya, of course, we know the situation when we had the Kenyan case in The Hague, and how big a deal that was, how big a potato that was. And yet at the same time that a lot of the information that the court was dealing with at that time was really public information that was already out there. But just the fact that somebody somewhere has touched it, all of a sudden exposes such a huge amount of risk. So this is a big challenge for us as record information managers. Even as we're envisioning technology, we're looking at technology that can adapt to the trends of today's risk environment. So in that case, many of us have gone around and we have bought EDRMSs, we have bought ERPs, we have bought, others have bought what we call EDMs, others have stuck to, we've separated. In some of our organization, we have RM, we have an RM, and we have a DM. It's very interesting how we've moved all these things. And sometimes it's very confusing. Some of these have different platforms, different databases, different operating systems. I know one time we're discussing about having an EDMS that is Linux-based, built on top of a Windows platform. That used to be interesting ideas really at the beginning. These days, nobody thinks about that because we have got too many problems, just too many problems in this sector, too many problems with IT. And that's the reason why everything that doesn't work these days, who do you blame? IT, isn't it? Who do you blame? Technology. I've read the news. I've seen a lot of the things that happen when information leaks, when there's a crisis and so on. The first place that people go and run, technology. It's a problem with our technology. Either we need to upgrade it or we need to scrape it and get a new one. It's an ever-ending story. So we as records managers and information managers, how can we prepare ourselves mentally and also visionary, have a vision for that, what we, like in quote, what we call the perfect IT solution for our objectives? Is there that perfect IT solution? Robert also talked about, is there that perfect policy? And of course, is said there's no perfect policy. And as we are moving towards, okay, now what are the tools and instruments you're going to use to implement this imperfect policy? So we find that we have an imperfect technology that we also were using to implement an imperfect policy. And what happens when you multiply imperfect things? At the end of the day, you've compounded complexity and increased the level of imperfections. So we've seen, in my own view, we've customized. We have, I've worked with several DMs, EDMs, even in the same organization. I've worked with different databases. I've worked with different, what we call governance systems, because you have governance for financial information, you have governance for health information, you have governance for security information, you have governance for maybe judicial information. And it seems that all these things are complex, and not just complex, but they're supposed to work together. And how do we try to bring all this together? We try to push technology. We say, okay, install this, buy this software, and let everybody use it. Mistake number one, we just over customized. We've taken a traditional records management system and customized it to work as a document management system. We've taken what we call, for example, collaboration platforms like SharePoint and so on, and we have customized them to work across the records management domain. There inherently generates immense problems. Why are we doing this? Because we want a centralized system. We want one system. The organization wants one system. They don't want to buy several systems. They want one system. In it presents a very interesting dilemma. So at the top, those who are handling the past say, why are we spending all this and having all these hundreds of systems, hundreds of solutions? Why not just have one? And having one is a challenge because we don't know which one to go for. Problem number two, integrations. So many integrations and breakpoints in the flow of technology. Let me give you an example. Now, for us, between the time that a piece of information arrives as evidence in the court, all the way to the time the judicial workflow is completed at the end of the pipeline, guess what? We've touched at least 150 different systems, 150 different repositories, where either copies or versions of this piece of evidence passed through, existed through the different touch points, the different people that collaborated around it in the various environments until the time it resulted in perhaps a decision at the end of the pipeline. At least 150 systems, just easy count. You put a process map and I can show you there will be at least 150 systems. Where are they talking to each other? Yes, we have a lot of integration and so on. Does that introduce complexity? Yes, it introduces a lot of complexity. Me as an information manager, records manager, should I be aware of all the records that are existing in all these 150 repositories? you would argue and say, yes, I need to be aware, I need to be involved in their life cycle management. So I need to be involved in governance. So at the same time, it presents also an interesting a situation for us where we have governance bureaucracies in organizations. Even be able to make a decision that can be translated into a configuration for an IT system takes a long time. And even then, it's not perfect because it's not a decision that has broad consensus abroad, across organizations. So you can see there are a lot of things that are broken. Interesting enough, as things are broken, we as information managers, we are aspired to think forwards, to envision. Perhaps we need to look at new paradigms. For me, I've spent now a lot of years now just thinking forwards and saying, okay, we have taken a lot of steps in terms of adapting to technology, bringing technology into the field of records and information management. But are we still dwelling on the old paradigms? I used to have the Bible, what we used to call the ISO 15486, the ISO standards as a Bible. Nowadays, I ask myself, is this sufficient? If I run around with this document around the organization, people will think that I'm crazy because the world has become so complex. The organization becomes so complex that just a one instrument like the ISO 149 itself doesn't provide the answers to technological solutions that we will need to adopt. For instance, we say, okay, now I want to adopt an EDRMS, I want to adopt an EDM. What tools should I have? What standards, what best practice should I look? The first place we go to is we retreat back to our own traditional records management, information management standards, which is great. It's a great place to start from. But the danger is it should not be the sole place we go to. We need to broaden our space. We need to look at all the major aspects, look at registration. For example, for us at the court now, registration is a very interesting term because it's a multitude of activities that involve around how information is received into the court from the social media, from the intermediaries, from international organizations, from the audio or audiovisual information that is coming from all around, from news channels, from feeds, Twitter feeds, from social media, Facebook, and so on. So there's an explosion of entry points where information is really coming into the organization. The next concept that we have is, okay, classification. Now, the tools that we have, do they help us? Even the term classification itself, should we rethink about a new way, like Robert said, a new language, for example, and a new business language of depicting what we mean by saying, okay, we want classification. Access and security is a very interesting term for us. We started off with, you remember the traditional hierarchical security models where you have, say, public, confidential, maybe secret, top secret, whatever. And then we use this to group individuals or stuff. This one is classified that can access confidential. This one can access top secret and so on. Guess what? In today's modern organization, this concept, this hierarchical concept of applying security classification is really breaking down. It's completely breaking down, So we set up our centralized databases. We're saying, okay, unless somebody is cleared at this level, you'll not have access to this type of material. And then we find that, hey, actually, in a normal business process, there are people who are coming and adapting different security needs at different points in times in their roles and exiting. You have somebody perhaps who's coming from the public side or is maybe a defense counsel. Let me give an example. A defense counsel, and all of a sudden, because a defense counsel, he or she may need to have access to maybe some top secret material, but this individual is traditionally not labeled or classified in our own internal systems as somebody cleared to receive, say, top secret information. Now, how do we use technology to help us solve this dilemma that paralyzes us, so that you have, for example, a new case, the amount of configuration that you have to do just to prepare for a new case, putting people in their places, classifying and grouping groups is so much work that by the time the case has ended, you will not have even done half of what you need to do to prepare just the records and information management pipeline for this case to succeed. So that's a very important dilemma for us that we find. So we need to see, okay, maybe there's a new paradigm, there's a new way of thinking about how do we adopt technology, how do we use technology. Robert has talked about disposition. Is a complex area, because now where we have data everywhere, can we really destroy? Myself, of course, I'm tasked with destroying a lot of data, but what is interesting is that as I destroy the data, you still find it popping up. Why does it pop? Because it's in people's hard drives, it is in the social media somewhere. So that concept of destruction becomes also very, very interesting as we look at technology. Search and discovery. There are so many things in this area that we need a new paradigm, because people are consuming the information in very different ways. They are consuming through feeds, through audiovisual, through looking at TV screens, using mobile services and mobile applications and so on. There's a lot of modes at which people are using technology to consume the information that we ourselves are managing. So this is a very interesting area that we need to rethink as we look at technology issues. Now, this brings me to the important really discussion point of where we say, okay, now, after going through and highlighting all these pains and problems, is there a new model of how we need to envision how we bring in technology in our records and information management space? Is technology for us a centralized repository? In many instances, for many of us, I've seen a lot of the work that is going on in Kenya at the moment. I looked also at what you shared earlier, and I've seen there are many organizations that are in the process of either buying an EDRMS, installing a centralized server, or maybe scanning records, digitizing, and so on. There's a lot of work going on. And the concept that I see emerging is that we are tending to go towards centralization and control in that manner. But the direction that I would like to point you towards is imagine the situation where centralization is crumbling down. It's crumbling down because the IT infrastructure, the IT tools that we have are insufficient when it comes to the concept of trying to centralize in a manner that we want everyone to use the same system. We want everyone to register a record in the same way. We want everybody to look at classification the same way. We want everybody to think about the life cycle and the governance using the same tools and the same methods. Now, what I present to you today is that concept of centralizing is really breaking down. Personally, for me, it has broken down. And why has it broken down? It has broken down because, first of all, the users, the business users, want their own methods and their own systems. We have translators, for example, in the court situation where they're using their own equipment, they are using their own interesting devices to speed up the ability to translate. They use their own repositories and their own dictionaries and their own word processes and so on. They're using their own tools We have interpreters. Interpreters are also using their own technology, you see. We have those who are examining evidence. They're using their own tools, their forensic tools. They have security assessment tools and so on. So every business wants to have its own system. This is a war that is going on, actually. The auditors, they want their own system. So we can't tell the auditors, no, once you all your records, please put them in this place. The auditor say, no, I have my own specific auditing tool that I would like to use. And don't ask me to do extra work, taking all that I have in here and registering in your centralized records management system. So there's a war going on. The new vision that I present to you is that we envision now how we look at technology, and Kenya is in a perfect situation to do this because you've embraced really advanced technology, advanced ways of thinking that the developing countries may not have had the opportunity to do so up to today. We've really gone straight into the mobile infrastructure, which means that for us, the concept of governance of the information lifecycle should be everywhere. So you're looking at governance everywhere, not governance in a centralized repository. You're looking at governance across multiple repositories, multiple systems. We're looking at new roles for ourselves. You heard now Robert is moving into IT in a bank. Of course, there's a big chance that his role is going to evolve, just like my role over time has evolved. I used to see myself as a primary keeper of a record, the organization official record, but that has shifted. Now my role spans across a lot of domains, I'm responsible also for, say, public information contracts with those organizations that are hosting our public information. So you find that my role has changed. I'm also a project manager in new software tools that many businesses are using in our organization. I'm also a business analyst in specific projects. So you can see my role has really evolved. Now, why has it evolved this way? It's because the world has changed and we need to understand a wide spectrum of technology so that we can do our role, our jobs best. And at this time, it's a very interesting point to say, look, let's go back to the beginning. Let's imagine a situation going forward. Let's imagine a mall. The picture that you have in front of you is a mall. A mall is a perfect concept. It's a very good concept to use as a metaphor to see our new organization today. Now, if you look at a mall, the difference between a mall and a major supermarket. A major supermarket is like the traditional records and information management office or business where everything is categorized in aisles and everything is uniform. You have shelves and shelf numbers and you have everything organized in one space. But guess what? Not every shopper is satisfied in going into a supermarket. A supermarket is really specific for that particular type of activity that the person is going to. But people are interested in a variety. So you can see the mall concept. They still order. There are still many brands. There are still many shops with different styles and versions. But they still order and harmony. And I think that is how we need to envision technology. That is how we need to envision placing technology in our domain. We don't necessarily have to go for the micro centralized systems, but think about really expanding our vision. Have the businesses have control, feel that they have control by giving them the tools that they need to do their job best. But we as information managers, we need to make every effort to understand those tools and see how can we provide governance at the top. So in the next class, basically what we are going to go through is looking at now this vision and this concept and asking ourselves, okay, now how can we analyze our business organization? We as records and information managers, how can we make overviews? How can we do a simple process mapping that enables us to make technological decisions or create an input in technological decisions for our organization? That is our role. That is our role. And that is when we begin to create benefit. That's when people in the IT begin to like to work with us. That's when people in the business begin to work with us, like to work with us. We need to sit right there in the middle between the business and the technology people. And to do that, we need to adopt a new way of thinking and a new vision. And this is to encourage you guys and encourage all of us as we embark on this journey, that it is possible. We need to look forward to it with gusto, and at the same time, we need to prepare ourselves adequately. So thank you very much, and allow just to give back to Cleophas for any questions that perhaps may have come across through the chats.
Thank you, Doc. I don't know if you had looked at the initial questions the colleagues sent in advance and whether there is any you may pick in the context of this discussion.
I think there's one of them which particular might be quite interesting. One of them mentioned about they are going towards, just a comment, towards SharePoint. Another one also mentioned about EDMS, the choice to make. Just briefly, just to mention about that dilemma, the fact that there's an organization that is moving towards SharePoint. Now you're asking yourself, is that the right thing to do? There is no yes or no answer to this. So the good thing is that for what your business is convinced to do, go for it. Go for it, but make sure that you understand. Make sure that you skill yourself. Go to those SharePoint trainings. Go to those open text trainings that perhaps the organization bring a tool, say an audit management tool. Go to those trainings, understand those tools in and out. Look at where is the data going, where is it stored. Ask questions. How do we apply governance on top of it? So don't be paralyzed and fighting these IT people when they say, okay, now we need to use this, now we need to do this, and so on. No. Don't be paralyzed. Don't get into a big fight over that. It's often a losing battle. When we fight the business, it's always a losing battle. Let's understand them from their needs perspective and use a little bit of tact and say, okay, yeah, we're looking at this system. Does it do this? Does it have at least an audit log? Does it have what are the security features and so on? Okay, we understand. Look at your policy. Does it reflect the main aspects or the main objectives of your policy? It does, yes. Do you need a bit more skilling? If you need a bit more skilling to understand, ask for that so that you provide now value to the business.
Yeah. I would pick. I do notice a number of questions would also be answered in subsequent discussions, especially the specific questions around certain solutions. But let me just pick some. There's a question here: how do you implement a change management strategy when rolling out an EDRMS in the public sector? So maybe you could just either you or Robert.
Yes.
Maybe I think let me pick the three, and then you can decide. So that right?
Go ahead. Yes.
The second one is how can integration be done with minimal disruption on other legacy systems? I hope you've picked that.
Yeah.
How can integration be done with minimal disruption on other legacy systems? The other one is how should one go about convincing an organization in the security sector on the need for automation, considering they mostly trust manual records? And I think here, Dr. Jones, with your judicial, your ICC experience, this is, I think, an issue of evidence.
Yeah, exactly.
How should one go about convincing organizations in the security sector on the need of automation, considering they mostly trust manual records? So probably you can take a go on that, you and Robert, you share out who and so on.
Okay, Robert, please go ahead already. You want either to change manual or integration? Where's Robert? Oh, yes. Rob, you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, we can hear you, Robert.
Okay, so shall I look at? Shall I approach the change management question?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes.
Okay, and let me just look back at in the public, and it specifically said in the public sector. Yeah. Okay. Well, first of all, I think just looking at this question, the thing that leaps out at me is the public sector part. I mean, if you compare that to the private sector, it's very different, really. I mean, if you work for Coca-Cola and they introduce a new EDMS and people are told to use it, then they're going to use it. You know, there's not really any question about whether you do or don't. In the public sector, there tends to be a feeling that things are optional. You know, so that you can do it if you want to. So there's more of I think in the public sector, there's more of a challenge with user acceptance, users making this change. You also have this the fact that people are very busy. So people are doing things in a particular way, and then you're asking them to change their business processes, because normally that is what is involved if you're introducing an EDMS. You're also asking people to work in a different way, and they're very busy, and people find it difficult to find the time to make that change. And we often in our lives, we end up continuing doing things the same way, even though it's not really convenient or efficient, just because we don't have time to step back and invest the time in making that change. Now, the most important thing clearly is that there is some kind of buy-in from the senior management, that people are told that they need to do it. That's the key from the start. But the strategy, I think, in terms of planning, you would need to look at cutoff points. At what point people should start doing things in the new way, which of the legacy materials should be migrated into the new system. Will there be some period of time where people are doing things in parallel, both in the old system and using the EDMS? Then it depends on what you mean by the EDMS implementation, the extent to which it will impact on the way people do things. As Jones mentioned, you know, things have evolved a lot now, and we can probably look at an EDMS as or we can look at records management at least as being a lot more than just the place where people store documents. It kind of encroaches on the whole business processes. And if you are introducing an EDMS and the only change to the user is that they will be saving documents in the EDMS instead of in a shared drive, then the change won't be so dramatic. It will just be a matter of using a different instructing them to save things in a different place. If, however, you're using different functionalities of the EDMS, if you're using workflow functionalities of the EDMS, and it really has a massive influence on the way people are working, then it's going to be more of a challenge. But I think the key thing is management buy-in, effective planning, training, make sure people know what is expected from them and they're able to do it. The planning with regard to the retirement of the previous system, planning with regard to the introduction of the new system, the new way of working, I don't know. I think that's what that's what I would say are the main elements, really.
Yeah.
I mean, do you have anything to add there, Jones?
Yeah, I think I would add one important factor which I saw is that whenever there's any project, it's very important that introduces change. It's very important for somebody from the records management or governance, information governance sector to be also as part of the project team in a specific role. And more so also when the project has transitioned into or is transitioning into production, I think it's very also important that somebody from our domain also is represented or sits within the CABs, the change advisory boards, that look at any change that is being introduced by a system in the organization. And this has helped a lot. For example, myself, I sit in the change advisory board for the systems within the court. It helps us a lot. So I know that if a system is changing, I can already analyze the impact across the information domain and put in my input and say, okay, then we need to consider this, we need to consider this, we need to look at this business that has this process, that have information that is flowing in this way, and they will be impacted, for example. So it presents a very interesting opportunity for us as information managers to play a big role. We have analytical skills. Let's use them. Let's sit in these boards and let's make ourselves useful. Then taking up also the question of integration. Somebody also mentioned about integrating with legacy systems and so on. Of course, integration is an important aspect of really making sure that work flows in a consistent manner. The only danger that I would need to share here is that let's look at a system, an IT system, as a tool or a repository or a solution that has a life cycle of not more than 5 years. So if we imagine that we have a system that is not long, that has a life cycle not more than 5 years, and we are putting in resources for heavy integration, we ask ourselves, okay, are we spending money in the right way? Should we be spending money in really managing the integration between systems in a hard fashion, or should we be focusing on actually retiring these legacy systems? I think for me, my advice would be to really go a little bit aggressively forward and say, okay, let's look at these systems as rigorously as we look at the information that it contains. We want to make sure that information lifecycle is managed appropriately, but at the same time, the system lifecycle also, the systems lifecycle also needs to be managed appropriately. So when it comes to integration, I usually prefer or advise what we call the loose integration, especially if you're dealing with multiple vendors from different domains and different systems. The hard integration brings a lot of problems down the line because change management becomes almost impossible. When you do updates, something breaks in another system across the line. So these are some of the things we need to watch out for. Even a simple patching, security patching, can bring your entire system down because we've hard-coded, we've really integrated tightly with the legacy systems. Some legacy systems cannot be updated anymore. And because they cannot be updated anymore, they run, for example, on Windows 7, while everybody else has moved to maybe Windows 10. And because you've integrated tightly, so you cannot actually do a proper transition to new technology because you are stuck with legacy integration. So this is an area that one needs to be looked at very, very carefully. For me, I would look at it really hard and rational. If a system is old, we need to plan its expiry as rigorously as we also manage the information itself. For those that are doing in the security organizations and you are used to doing things manually, for example, like us in the judicial section, in the judicial sector, there's a lot of paper-based processes, and convincing people in this area to automate is really difficult. It's really difficult. But at the same time, I think this is an area that we need to put in a lot of effort because we need to show value. we need to show value. Just the fact that we're telling them automate for the sake of automating doesn't help. We need to find out from this business, from this security organization, where do they see their value? Is their value in the speed at which they adjudicate their cases? For example, if it comes to a case like us, and that's the biting point. That's the cake that you present. You say, okay, look, we are struggling to run a decent case within a period of time X. If we bring in this process or this technology, we are going to shorten that period to say half or even a third. Then you have their interest. All right. If we look at things like where money is being spent and resources are being spent, that's one of the interesting areas for us information managers to look at critically. That's why in the next class where we start looking about doing a business analysis overview, these are the questions we'll be asking. How can we read, scope the organization and see where value is? So that when we speak to these people, we're not speaking to them about records management, about technology. We're speaking to them their business language, their own business language, where they get their value from. So I would urge that this is an area we have to keep on hitting. Those of us in such organizations, we know that these organizations will completely be extinct if they don't move, especially now in the corona period, for example. Imagine if the court, for example, hadn't adopted, if the ICC had not adopted an e-court strategy, we would not have been able to function during the corona period. And these are some of the things, it would be too expensive, almost impossible to do so during this period. But because we've embarked on automation and bringing in technology in this space, we've been able to survive. So let's really be open. Let's not give up the fight. Let's keep on insisting in this organization. Let's be the oracle that speaks in these organizations to say, hey, look, this is where business value is going. This is where we're losing resources. This is where we're losing time. This is where we're losing money. And if we do these things, we can actually bring back some benefit into the organization. So I think that would be my take. Actually, it's not a big secret.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Johnson, Robert. And I know the issue of management buy-in keeps coming up, but I think you responded to it very well. Another question. This is I'll send. I will ask Robert to speak to it. I know you are moving into the IT function, you said. How can RM professionals involve IT in records management? How can RM professionals involve IT in records management? I know here in Kenya, that has been a bit of a challenge in terms of how RM professionals collaborate with the IT colleagues. And I know you just probably mentioned talked about it before, but you'll just say something briefly. And then I have a question here from Msibi. I think this should be our colleague joining us from Namibia. I know we do have some colleagues joining us from Namibia. Greetings, colleagues. In the context of government archival institutions, we have a mandate to manage records generated by all the government agencies. What strategies can we adopt to ensure that this is effectively done with each of these entities, using different systems relevant to their business? So I guess, Jones, you would also just say, we've also touched on it, but you could just some little emphasis. Another one here from Douglas Maina. Good morning. Is it advisable to run both manual and automated system, especially when implementing a new EDRMS? Yeah, you may take a go. Robert, you're muted.
Oh yeah, sorry.
Yeah.
So on the issue of the IT question, what was it again? It was how do they cooperate together, the IT and records management? And this is a very interesting question, really. I mean, I see this also in my my main job as records manager. I'm also a data protection officer, and I go to the meetings of the data protection, the network of data protection officers of the institutions and agencies. And there we have a similar kind of issue where about whether it is better to have basically the data protection officers are either lawyers with some knowledge of IT or IT people with some knowledge of law. And then but both of those two categories can struggle. So the IT people don't know enough about the law or don't take it seriously enough. And of course, the lawyers don't know enough about the IT things. And then you have a small subgroup who are records managers like myself, who kind of know a bit about the law and a bit about IT. So in that case, it's a good kind of compromise. Now, if you go back to the records management, a similar kind of issue, really. I mean, is it better to have a records manager with some knowledge of IT or an IT professional with some knowledge of records management? And there's no easy answer there. But it reminds me of this movie. I don't know if many of you will have seen this movie Armageddon with Bruce Willis. It's a movie from the 90s, one of these disaster movies that was popular at that time. And in the movie, there's a huge asteroid heading towards Earth. And Bruce Willis is a miner, and they send him up onto that asteroid to drill a hole and blow it up. And I remember seeing this question and answer session with the director of that movie, and somebody put their hand up and said, wouldn't it have been easier to train an astronaut to drill rather than training a miner to be an astronaut? And so, I mean, I thought that was very interesting, really. You have this issue about, is it better to have a records manager who knows about IT or vice versa? Now, I kind of think now it's good for records management to be placed within IT, for records managers to be very closely involved with their IT colleagues, rather than just using them as some kind of resource or support function. I think it's good for records management to exist as an entity within the departments, within an organization's IT department. But if that's not the case, I mean, the important thing is communication and language. Like I mentioned earlier, that there can be some confusion between basic terms such as file and classification. And another one that often causes confusion with IT colleagues is archiving. You know, simple as that. I mean, for IT people, when you talk about archiving emails, they just mean it's kind of segregating it so it's out of the way somewhere. Whereas for us as records managers, it means something very explicit. We're talking about it's storing it in a particular way where its value is represented. So I think it's good to have meetings with IT to clarify this terminology, make sure you know what each other's talking about. I mentioned earlier about the importance of having a records management policy that provides definitions and terminology to ensure that people have this common language. And I mean, that's also what's valuable about the standards, really. I mean, Jones mentioned that the ISO 15489, you know, perhaps seems less relevant in this modern world, but at least these standards provide a common lexicon, a common language, and it's important within your organization for the IT staff to know that language. And if you do introduce some records management policy that has this terminology within it, you could at least make sure that your IT staff read it. Even better, you can make sure that the language of this policy is very closely aligned with the policies that your IT colleagues have in place. So yeah, in short, I would say the key is communication, terminology, technical terminology, making sure that you both know each other's language. I mean, it's equally important for records managers to know the language of IT. And the language of IT can be very confusing. I remember once when I worked at the court where Jones works, the IT colleagues once sent an email to all staff saying, "Exchange will be down tomorrow," meaning the Exchange server on which the email system is based will be down tomorrow. Of course, nobody knew what that meant. You say Exchange will be down. IT people understand that, but outside of IT, nobody had a clue what it meant. So that's an example, of the language of IT can be confusing to people outside of IT. The language of records managers can be confusing to IT staff. So I think it's important to work together, make sure you both know what each other's talking about. Okay?
Thank you.
Cleophas, what was the first question again for me?
There was a question from CB about that we have a mandate to manage records generated by all the government agencies. Yes. What strategies can we adopt to ensure that this is effectively done with each of these entities using different systems relevant to their business?
Let me tackle that one first. I think this question really is right at the heart and the core of our role as records information managers. I think it's important not only just to look at our role as maybe policy or instrument keepers, but at the same time look ourselves as being enablers of businesses. So for me, I think the advice that I would give here is that pick one organization and model a best practice around it. In these kinds of situations, it's very hard to create a broad mandate. Some of the policies that we have are really vague, and they don't normally give sufficient powers to record information managers to enforce compliance at the procedural level that organizations should apply to. So here I would use the technique where we use peer pressure. With peer pressure, it's very good because once you take a friendly organization that is really eager to work with you and you're able to help that organization see the
I lost you, Jones.
Yeah, Jones, we've lost you. Hopefully you
concept model along a similar best practice. You can use that to create. Can you hear me? I think my connection. Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, you can use that concept of the three organizations to bring about what we call a peer pressure across the other organizations, so they can be able to follow suit. They like to compete against each other. So you don't force them, but at the same time, try to build a best practice. So our diplomacy skills here must be really top-notch. We need to really upskill in how we negotiate and apply diplomacy as we do it. We cannot just do a blanket mandate.
Okay.
Maybe can I just add something else on that question on the government archival institutions?
Yes.
Yeah, because I mean I work a lot with historical archives of the EU in Florence in Italy, and the historical archives of the EU, they receive archives from all the different institutions and agencies of the European Union, which is they are multiple, and I mean looking at the way they work, I think it's important if you have I mean, if you're receiving material from multiple entities, you should define some kind of protocol for how things should be received. So, I mean, if you're receiving things in the same way, it makes it a lot easier for you. It could be that you only accept things in certain file types, for example. It could be that you require things to be titled in a certain way, and also the metadata that people need to provide. I mean, they use, for the historical archives, they use this ISAD-G metadata, and certain, which is a whole suite of metadata for archives, and certain of those fields, around 9 of them, are mandatory and the rest are optional. So everything they receive is coming in a sort of similarly formatted package. So even though the material is coming from a diverse range of sources, it's all has a similar flavor. So I would say my advice would be to lay down some rules and be strict on how you receive things from these different agencies. And then if there's some consistency there, it shouldn't present too much of a problem for you, even though it is coming from different sources. Okay.
Thank you. So the other one, Jones, on whether from mine, I don't know if you picked it. Manual. Is it advisable to run both manual and automated system when implementing an EDRMS?
Yes, in many instances, we can't avoid that because of transition and change management. So it's so important that we decide which takes the precedent. For example, at the court, we decided, for example, that only the digital version will be the version for conducting business. The physical version is just for reference purposes, perhaps for biometric preservation if necessary, and so on. So even though we cannot completely eliminate the manual processes, but at least we can determine where our focus is and where the vision is. So in this case, I would say that it is very possible to have both at the same time, but have one that really presents the vision of the organization. At the same time, avoid just migrating manual processes to automated processes. There has to be some re-engineering here to make sure that we are making the best use of automated systems. The mistake we make is we copy a manual system and copy the process and the mapping of a manual system and build it the same way in an automated system. So there's no value transferred. There's no scalability. At the same time, we don't make use. The business doesn't see the impact, doesn't see the benefit of automating if it's not directly done properly. So for me, I think I would say that. Rob, you want to say something on top of that, or?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, I would say complement what you said, but by looking at it in the reverse, yeah, because you often have you may have some records that for whatever reason need to still be processed manually. They're forms that are signed, but even then, even those, you should also have a digital version of it. You know, you should scan it also in parallel. It might be that the paper version, this is the opposite of what Jones said, but it might be that the paper version is the definitive version for certain legal versions. But you should really also have in parallel this electronic version, which might just be a consultation copy. Because I mean, also with this COVID situation, you need to think of business continuity planning. You need to have an electronic version that people can look at least from wherever they might be. And also as a backup, you know, there could be a fire and all the physical records are gone. So I think it's totally plausible to have, I wouldn't say that, the question was, is it advisable? I mean, I won't go that far. I mean, I would say it's certainly, if you have physical records or manual records, as you put it, and that's unavoidable, and they have to remain in that way, then I would say, yes, it is advisable to keep an electronic version in parallel for business continuity reasons, for accessibility reasons, for searchability reasons. I mean, also having the electronic version allows people to search for words within it. I mean, imagine trying to do that by looking through the hard copies. So I would say, you know, in many situations, yes, it would be advisable, but I also concur with Jones that if you're going to move away from manual process, you need to think outside the box and totally redesign it. You know, you don't, like in our organization, we used to have like a leave form. People filled in a form to request leave. Now we just have something in the ERP where people check a button and it's done. We didn't convert. It would be foolish to make, say, a PDF form that people apply an electronic signature to, and you have this PDF replacing this physical form. Yes, it is digitizing it, but it's not re-engineering it. And you can actually take the opportunity to make things a lot simpler, you know, when you move to an electronic environment. Okay.
Thank you. I think I'll ask this last one from Vili. I was going to skip it, but let me ask. You know, Vili prayed for us, so I don't want her to recall her prayers. She's asking, when it comes to system acquisition, is it okay to do request for proposals or expression of interests or the quotation away? And you may realize, Robert and Jones, why we have a bit more questions around the systems is because we have a number of projects that are happening in this country around records information automation. So colleagues are in the thick of things to try and put in, move forward, implement something in the organizations. Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I can speak to this. Now, I think that's a fantastic question. It's a good question. I would ask myself, are we involved in the procurement process? And how are we involved? Are we just involved as technical evaluators? Are we just involved as advisors? Or are we also involved in determining how that process is conducted? I think the answer should be yes to all of this. We as records information managers, we need to be involved. We need to be involved from the early stages, from the scoping studies, all the way to the determination of the scope of works for the procurement documents themselves that are going out, all the way even up to participating in the committees that are evaluating the vendors and the technologies that are to be implemented. So in this regard, the question whether to do an EOI, expression of interest, or to go straight to RFP, I think for me, in the advice I would give, it will depend on the risk of the organization, and also it will also depend on how satisfied we as information and record managers are on understanding the problem that needs to be fixed and the solutions, the possible solutions that are available. If we find that we have sufficient knowledge and the sufficient capacity within the vendor community to implement or to provide solutions that would be standardized to fit and solve our challenge, then a simple RFP process could be adequate. But if we find that this is such an area that one, we don't have yet sufficient knowledge in the industry. We don't have sufficient knowledge of who are the players in this industry. What are the technologies that they're going to implement or propose? Then an EOI presents a unique situation for us to understand what is the offering. An EOI for me is like a tester to validate the problem we are trying to solve in the organization. Because through an EOI, you'll have vendors asking, what do you mean by this? What about this? Have you thought about this solution? So we have the opportunity between the EOI and the RFP to refine and also review our understanding of the scope. Unfortunately, with the EOI, you have to start much earlier, and this is why it's a bit difficult. In public institutions, I think for an EOI, you have to start at least 3 or 2 years earlier. And some of us don't have the luxury to budget that far. If we wait to do an EOI within the year, which we need to consume, and then from there go to an RFP, and then we'll get stuck. By the time you have the solution, maybe the budget allocation period is done and you are stuck with it. So I think that's the advice I would give. Look at it from a risk perspective. If you know this is a common area that many other organizations have implemented, there's little risk, transition risk, change management risk, then I think an RFP would do fine. But if it's an area of substantial risk and the organization has little knowledge, internal knowledge of the potential solutions which could be used to fix, then I think it's better to start with an expression of interest.
Thank you, Doc. I think we now need to wrap this, bring this to an end. I think for me, before I ask to make your final remarks, it's just to thank you, Robert and Jones, for the very, very deep and extensive insights you've shared with the team. I guess you've also picked some ideas on what's happening around, around records information in our market here, and why this knowledge is also important to us. I've also taken particular attention to, your broader and specialized, I would say, perspective of the RIM world, and even just the opportunities that are there for us as professionals. And I'm saying this because I've had a number of professional colleagues asking and wondering whether they are actually in the right profession in the first place, whether there's actually future in this record story, or they are lost, But listening to you, I'm sure you provide a lot of insights and a lot of awareness to many of us on the opportunities of even just job enrichment within the records, and that there's lots of future and a lot of opportunities which you can leverage on and really position yourself, even just for personal growth. But also, again, the challenge that we have to expand our horizons, invest in more learning, the wider view. Jones, you said your role as a business, going through the business process analysis, sitting on the various projects, and just the broader view of the organization. I think these are the things we need. And so we're extremely grateful that you're able to raise this to us, and just underscoring that our work would require both technical and leadership competencies and leadership know-how. And we look forward for subsequent engagements on this so that we can build a body of strong professionals. I just thought before I ask you to make a comment, I don't know whether Msibi, you can hear us. Msibi is the director of National Archives for Eswatini or Swaziland. If you can hear us, you may just say hi to the team. If not, it's okay. He may be probably off. Yeah, fine. So I think I would ask you, Jones, maybe just your last remarks, and then we wind up. As I thank you so much, Robert. I think your first time to engage with us. We've really drawn a lot of knowledge, and again, just listening to your story, the various professional points or stations, various organizations you have been able to work in, and you're now moving into a financial sector. I think it just shows us that as RIM people, the opportunities are unlimited. I don't have to work and retire where I am there. I can cross industries so long as I'm solid on the fundamentals and what I need to do. And so these are the kind of things we really appreciate when we hear from people like you, and it means a lot to us, and a lot of inspiration to us.
Yeah, there are opportunities. You mentioned that some of your members have some anxieties, wondering whether they're in the right profession. I think it's important, like in every area of life, to evolve and grow. And it's important, I think, for records managers to learn as many other skills as they can, especially on business process analysis. You might be looking for jobs as records managers, searching these websites for records management jobs, but it might actually be a business process analysis job that meets your profile. You need to also think outside the box a bit and look at your skill set and look at the bigger picture, and not limit yourself to records management and archives. There could be other jobs that you could do relating to information management that are not necessarily titled in that way.
Thank you. Jones, any last comment?
Yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity, really, again, to sit again. I see this opportunity as really a wonderful way to share and learn from one another. So I'm really encouraged, and I hope all of you are also encouraged and also challenged also to join us next time. And hopefully, as we carry on, each one will have opportunity to share best practice skills as we move along. So the next one, of course, is an interesting one because it's driving right to the business overview, being able to analyze the organizations quickly and nicely, and being able to learn the simple skills on process mapping that will be very, very useful when you're implementing RIM projects in the organization. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Cleophas, and
Thank
the
you.
rest of you. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Before we just leave, I understand we have also a few colleagues from Namibia. Could any one of you, yeah, just you see how what technology is enabling us. We thought we will only be people from Kenya, but we have guys from Swaziland, Namibia. Anyone from Namibia who is hearing us who could say hi? Okay.
To unmute them.
Are they? Yeah, probably would unmute. Collins, are you able to unmute our colleagues from Namibia? I think this will be Bongile, Telebani, Tembelani. We have people from the National Archives of Namibia and the Bank of Namibia. Okay, Collins?
I've given everyone the right to unmute themselves.
Okay, so if you can hear us, you may just unmute any one of you. And even if you can show your face so that we can confirm we are not talking to a robot. Okay, I guess we are not. Msibi, are you able to hear us? Are you able to unmute?
Hello, colleague.
Hi.
Yes, this is Sibongile from Eswatini.
Yes.
My director is Mr. Msibi. I don't know, we're not together, so I'm not sure where the problem is. I had hoped that he was going to maybe give a vote of thanks on our behalf.
Oh, yes.
This has been a great learning curve for us, and we really look forward to more of such forums. We are still young in the profession, and we really need to grow. And then come the issues of COVID, just when you are grappling with everything. So I just want to say our heartfelt thanks to the whole team. I joined a bit late, but I have immensely benefited from this. Thank you so much, colleagues. We're looking forward to more of these gatherings. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, and looking forward for more collaboration. So colleagues, thank you so much. I think we now have to get to our desks. So we will be meeting on the 7th of August. Same time.
Okay. Well,
thank
you. Thanks a lot, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye, and good day to everyone. Thanks, John. Thanks, Robert.
Bye.
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 Thank you.
Thank you.